My name is Elena Rodriguez, and at 28 years old, I learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you most are the ones who see you as nothing more than a bank account waiting to be emptied. When my beloved aunt passed away 3 months ago and left me her entire $15 million estate, I thought I had finally found the security I'd been searching for my whole life. Instead, I discovered the true nature of my family's love, and it wasn't pretty. If you're watching this from a situation where family members are pressuring you about money or inheritance, drop a comment below and hit subscribe to see how I protected myself from people who should have been protecting me. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Phoenix, Arizona, in a small 3-bedroom house that always felt too cramped for our family of 5. My parents, Roberto and Carmen Rodriguez, worked tirelessly to provide for me and my 2 younger brothers, Miguel, 25, and David, 22. Dad was a mechanic at a local auto shop, putting in 60-hour weeks with hands permanently stained black from motor oil. Mom cleaned houses for wealthy families in Scottsdale, leaving before dawn and returning after dark, exhausted but determined to give us opportunities she never had. Money was always tight. I remember the stress of back-to-school shopping, watching Mom carefully count bills at the grocery store, and the embarrassment of wearing hand-me-downs from my cousins. Despite their hard work, my parents struggled with financial planning. Dad had a weakness for lottery tickets and get-rich-quick schemes, while Mom would occasionally splurge on expensive items we couldn't afford when she felt particularly defeated by our circumstances. They loved us fiercely, but financial stress was a constant undercurrent in our household. The one bright spot in our financial struggles was my Aunt Isabella Martinez, my mother's younger sister. Isabella had never married or had children, instead channeling her energy into building a successful real estate investment business. She started small, buying and flipping properties, then gradually moved into commercial real estate. By the time I was in high school, she owned a portfolio of rental properties and commercial buildings throughout Arizona and New Mexico. What made Isabella special wasn't just her success, but her generosity with family. She quietly paid for my school supplies, funded family vacations we never could have afforded, and covered emergency expenses when Dad's hours got cut or Mom got sick. She never made a big show of helping, just quietly ensuring we had what we needed. She was particularly close to me, perhaps because I was the only one who showed genuine interest in her business stories and financial advice. Isabella lived modestly despite her wealth, driving a practical Honda Civic and living in a comfortable but unassuming house. She often told me, "Elena, money is a tool, not a trophy. Use it wisely, and it will serve you well. Waste it, and it will disappear faster than you can imagine." She taught me about budgeting, investing, and the importance of financial independence. These conversations shaped my relationship with money in ways that would prove crucial later. Growing up, my relationship with my parents was complicated by their approach to money and responsibility. They expected me to contribute financially to the household from the time I was old enough to work, which I understood and accepted. However, they also had a habit of borrowing money from me with promises to pay it back that rarely materialized. In high school, I worked part-time at a local restaurant, and my parents frequently asked for loans from my earnings for everything from car repairs to David's sports equipment. When I went to college on a partial academic scholarship, I worked multiple jobs to pay for living expenses and help support the family. My parents viewed my education not as an investment in my future, but as preparation for a better job that would allow me to contribute more to the family. They never explicitly said I owed them for raising me, but the expectation was always there. Miguel, my middle brother, followed a different path. Charming and athletic, he received a full football scholarship to Arizona State University, but squandered it partying and skipping classes. When he lost his scholarship junior year, he moved back home and bounced between jobs, always with plans to figure things out that never materialized. Despite his failures, my parents consistently enabled him, making excuses for his behavior and often asking me to help him financially. David, the youngest, was perhaps the most concerning. He had inherited Dad's gambling tendencies, but with access to online betting and cryptocurrency speculation. Throughout high school and into his early 20s, he accumulated significant debts that my parents repeatedly bailed him out of, often by asking me to contribute to the family emergency fund. After college, I moved to Denver for a marketing job with a tech startup. The distance from Phoenix was partly practical, better job opportunities, but also emotional. I needed space from the constant financial pressure and the feeling that my worth to my family was measured primarily by what I could provide. I maintained regular contact, sending money when genuine emergencies arose, but I tried to establish boundaries around casual requests for cash. Isabella supported my decision to leave Phoenix. "You need to build your own life, Mija," she told me during one of our weekly phone calls. Family is important, but not when they use guilt as a weapon. She understood the dynamics better than anyone, having observed my parents' financial patterns for years. My relationship with Isabella deepened during my 20s. While my parents' calls often included requests for money, Isabella and I talked about books, travel, business ideas, and life goals. She visited me in Denver several times, and I spent holidays with her when I couldn't afford to fly home. She became not just an aunt, but a mentor and genuine friend. 2 years ago, Isabella was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The news devastated our family, but she approached her illness with the same practical determination she brought to everything else. She updated her will, organized her affairs, and made peace with her prognosis. Throughout her treatment, I flew to Phoenix regularly to spend time with her, sometimes using vacation days and depleting my savings to be present during her final months. During her last weeks, Isabella and I had many conversations about life, family, and what mattered most. She expressed concern about my parents' financial situation and their dependence on others to solve their problems. "Elena," she said during one of our last serious talks, "I want you to promise me something. When I'm gone, don't let anyone make you feel guilty about the choices you make. The money I'm leaving you, it comes with no strings attached. Use it to build the life you want, not the life others expect you to provide." I held her hand and promised, having no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. Isabella passed away peacefully in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in September. The funeral was small but touching, attended by family, a few close friends, and several grateful tenants whose lives she had improved through fair rent and responsive maintenance. In her eulogy, I spoke about her generosity, wisdom, and the quiet way she made everyone around her feel valued. A week after the funeral, Isabella's attorney, James Chin, called to schedule a meeting about the will. I assumed this was routine, perhaps she had left me a small inheritance or some personal items. I had no idea that my life was about to change completely. James's office was in a sleek downtown Phoenix high-rise, all glass and steel that reflected the wealth of his clientele. As I sat in the conference room with the other beneficiaries, my parents and brothers, James reviewed the smaller bequests first. Isabella had left $10,000 to each of my brothers, $5,000 to several charities, and various personal items to family members. Then James cleared his throat and looked directly at me. "Elena, your aunt has left you the remainder of her estate. This includes her investment properties, business holdings, personal residence, and liquid assets. After taxes and expenses, the total value is approximately $15 million. The room fell completely silent. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. $15 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, impossible. I stared at James, waiting for him to correct himself or explain that there had been some mistake. My parents' reactions were immediate and revealing. Dad's face flushed red, and he stood up abruptly. "There must be an error," he declared. Isabella would never leave that much money to Elena while giving her brothers so little. We're her family too. Mom reached across the table toward the documents. "Let me see that will. This doesn't make sense. Elena's just a kid. What is she going to do with $15 million? Miguel laughed bitterly. "Of course the favorite child gets everything. This is such bullshit." David, true to form, immediately started calculating. 15 million split 4 ways would be almost 4 million each. "That's fair. That makes sense." James remained professional but firm. "I can assure you the will is valid and legally binding. Ms. Martinez was of sound mind when she drafted it, and she made her intentions very clear. She specifically stated that she believed Elena would use the inheritance wisely to build a meaningful life. My parents demanded to see the will, which James provided. As they read Isabella's words, their expressions shifted from disbelief to anger to something that looked almost like betrayal. The will was clear. Isabella had left me the bulk of her estate because she believed I would honor her values and use the money responsibly. In a section addressed to the family, Isabella had written, "I know this decision may cause hurt feelings, but I have watched Elena demonstrate financial responsibility, compassion, and wisdom throughout her life. I trust her to use this inheritance not just for herself, but to make positive contributions to the world. To my other beloved family members, I hope you understand that love cannot be measured in dollars, and my affection for each of you remains unchanged." As we left the attorney's office, the family dynamic had already shifted. My parents barely spoke to me, their shock evident in their strained expressions. Miguel and David exchanged looks that suggested they were already planning their approach. I felt overwhelmed, guilty, and completely unprepared for what was about to come. That evening, my parents asked me to stay for dinner. The conversation that followed would change our relationship forever. "Elena," Dad began, his voice carrying the forced calm of someone trying to contain strong emotions, "we need to talk about this inheritance situation." I nodded, still processing everything that had happened. "I know it's a shock. I'm as surprised as anyone." Mom set down her coffee cup harder than necessary. "Surprised? Elena, this is devastating. Your brothers have been struggling financially, your father and I are approaching retirement with no savings, and Isabella leaves $15 million to the one person in the family who already has a good job and no dependents. That's not fair, Mom. I work hard for what I have, and I've helped this family plenty over the years." "Helped?" Miguel interjected, his voice rising. "Elena, we're talking about $15 million. Do you have any idea how much that could change all of our lives? You could solve every financial problem this family has ever had." David leaned forward eagerly. "Think about it, sis. You could pay off Mom and Dad's house, set up college funds, start businesses for Miguel and me. We could all be set for life." I looked around the table at my family, people I loved, and saw something in their eyes that chilled me. They weren't seeing me as Elena, their daughter and sister. They were seeing me as a solution to all their financial problems, a lottery ticket that happened to share their DNA. "I haven't even had time to process what this means," I said carefully. "I need to meet with financial advisors, understand the tax implications, figure out how to manage the properties." Dad waved his hand dismissively. "Elena, don't overcomplicate this. Your family. Family shares. Your aunt may have put your name on those papers, but that money should benefit everyone." The assumption in his words, that I should automatically distribute the inheritance, revealed everything I needed to know about how they viewed the situation. This wasn't a request. It was an expectation. "Actually," I said, finding my voice, "the money is mine." Isabella made a deliberate choice, and she explained her reasoning. She wanted me to use it to build a meaningful life. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mom's face hardened in a way I'd rarely seen. "A meaningful life? Elena, what could be more meaningful than taking care of your family? We sacrificed everything to raise you, to give you opportunities. Don't you think you owe us something?" And there it was. The guilt trip I had been expecting, wrapped in the language of obligation and sacrifice. I had heard variations of this argument my entire adult life, but never with stakes this high. "I'm grateful for everything you did to raise me," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But raising your children isn't an investment that guarantees a financial return. You chose to have kids, and I didn't ask to be born with an obligation to fund everyone else's dreams." Miguel stood up, pacing behind his chair. "Listen to yourself, Elena. You sound like a selfish stranger. This isn't you talking, it's the money already changing you." "The money isn't changing me. But this conversation is showing me sides of all of you I didn't want to see." Over the next hour, the discussion became increasingly heated. My parents alternated between guilt trips, logical arguments about family responsibility, and thinly veiled threats about the consequences of my selfishness. Miguel and David took turns painting pictures of the amazing life we could all have if only I would do the right thing and share the wealth. What struck me most was their complete inability to see the situation from my perspective. Not once did anyone acknowledge that I might have my own dreams, goals, or plans for the money. Not once did anyone consider that Isabella's decision to leave the inheritance to me specifically might deserve respect. They saw the money as a family resource that had been temporarily assigned to the wrong person. As the evening wore on, I realized that this conversation was just the beginning. My family wasn't going to accept my decision to keep the inheritance intact. They were going to continue pressuring me, manipulating me, and using every emotional weapon in their arsenal to change my mind. I left my parents' house that night feeling more alone than I had since Isabella's death. The inheritance, which should have felt like a blessing, was already becoming a source of family conflict. I began to understand why Isabella had warned me about letting others make me feel guilty about my choices. Over the following weeks, the pressure intensified in ways I hadn't anticipated. My parents called daily, each conversation somehow circling back to the inheritance and my responsibility to share it. They would start with normal family topics, work, weather, local news, then gradually shift to financial stress, upcoming expenses, or opportunities that could be seized, if only we had the resources. Mom had perfected a particularly effective approach. She would call upset about Dad's health, his back pain from years of physical labor, the expensive medications they couldn't afford, the retirement they couldn't fund. "Elena," she would say, her voice breaking with emotion, "your father has worked so hard his whole life. He deserves to rest, to not worry about money every day. You could give him that peace." These calls left me emotionally drained and second-guessing myself. Was I being selfish? Had Isabella really intended for me to ignore my family's needs? The guilt was overwhelming, made worse by my genuine love for my parents and brothers. Miguel took a different approach, focusing on missed opportunities and the unfairness of wealth distribution. He would text me articles about successful entrepreneurs who had started with family funding or statistics about how inherited wealth could lift entire families out of poverty. "Elena," he wrote in one lengthy message, "we could all be successful if we just had the capital to get started. You're holding the key to everyone's dreams." David was the most direct, sending me detailed budget breakdowns of how the money could be divided, complete with investment projections and charts showing how we could all live comfortably for the rest of our lives. His spreadsheets were actually quite impressive, which somehow made them more manipulative. The pressure wasn't limited to my immediate family. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years suddenly reached out to catch up and inevitably mentioned their financial struggles. Aunts and uncles shared stories about Isabella's generosity and how she would have wanted the money to help everyone. Family friends offered unsolicited advice about the proper way to handle inherited wealth. Even more disturbing were the assumptions people made about my future behavior. At Isabella's memorial service, a distant cousin approached me and said, "I know you'll do right by the family, Elena. Isabella always said you were the responsible one." The implication was clear. Being responsible meant sharing the wealth, regardless of Isabella's explicit intentions. The worst part was how the pressure affected my relationship with each family member individually. With my parents, every conversation became tainted by unspoken expectations. Simple interactions felt loaded with hidden meaning. When Dad mentioned needing new tires for his truck, was it just conversation or a hint? When Mom talked about wanting to visit her sister in Mexico, was she sharing dreams or dropping hints about funding needed? With Miguel and David, the dynamic shifted even more dramatically. They began treating me with a strange combination of deference and resentment, as if I were both their potential savior and the obstacle to their success. Miguel, who had always been protective of his younger sister, now spoke to me with barely concealed anger when I didn't immediately agree to fund his latest business idea. David, who had previously kept his gambling problems relatively private, now openly discussed his debts and the investment opportunities that could solve everything. 3 weeks after the will reading, I decided to visit Denver early to get some distance and perspective. I needed to think clearly about my options without the constant emotional pressure from my family. As I packed my suitcase in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by photos and mementos from a simpler time, I felt like I was leaving behind not just a place, but a version of myself. The plane ride to Denver gave me time to reflect on everything that had happened since Isabella's death. I pulled out my journal and tried to process my emotions, which ranged from grief to guilt to anger to confusion. I missed Isabella terribly, not just because I loved her, but because she was the one person who would have understood what I was going through. In Denver, I scheduled a meeting with Sarah Martinez, no relation to Isabella, despite the shared surname, a financial advisor who specialized in managing inherited wealth. Sarah's office was warm and professional, decorated with plants and family photos that immediately put me at ease. She had been recommended by James Chin as someone who understood both the technical and emotional complexities of large inheritances. "Elena," Sarah said as we settled into her office, "first, let me express my condolences on your aunt's passing. Losing someone close to you is difficult enough without adding financial stress to the situation." I nodded gratefully. "Thank you. To be honest, I'm feeling completely overwhelmed. I went from being a marketing coordinator with student loans to inheriting $15 million. I don't even know where to start." Sarah smiled knowingly. "That's a completely normal reaction. Most people aren't prepared for sudden wealth, and family pressure often makes the situation more complicated. Tell me what's been happening since you learned about the inheritance." I spent the next hour describing the family pressure, the guilt trips, and the assumptions everyone was making about how I should use the money. Sarah listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. "What you're experiencing is unfortunately very common," she said when I finished. When someone inherits significant wealth, family members often feel entitled to a share, regardless of the deceased person's explicit wishes. They rationalize this feeling with arguments about fairness, family loyalty, and need. "But are they right?" I asked. "Should I feel obligated to share? My parents did sacrifice for me, and my brothers are struggling financially." Sarah leaned forward thoughtfully. "Elena, let me ask you something. If your aunt had wanted your parents and brothers to inherit significant amounts, don't you think she would have structured her will differently? She was clearly an intelligent, successful woman who understood money management. Her decision to leave the bulk of her estate to you was deliberate and thoughtful." The question hit me like a revelation. Of course, Isabella had considered other options. She had years to think about her estate planning, and she had chosen to leave the money to me specifically. Honoring that decision wasn't selfishness, it was respecting her wishes and her judgment. Sarah continued, "That doesn't mean you can't choose to help your family financially if you want to, but it should be your choice, made without pressure or guilt, and structured in a way that aligns with your values and goals." We spent the rest of the meeting discussing practical matters, tax implications, investment strategies, property management, and the timeline for various decisions. Sarah recommended a team of professionals, attorneys, accountants, and investment managers who could help me navigate the complexities of managing inherited wealth. As I left Sarah's office, I felt clearer about my situation than I had since Isabella's death. I wasn't being selfish by keeping the inheritance intact. I was being responsible by taking time to make thoughtful decisions rather than reacting to emotional pressure. But I also knew that my family wouldn't understand or accept this perspective. The pressure would continue, and I needed to decide how to handle it. That evening, I called my best friend from college, Rachel, who now lived in Portland. Rachel had always been direct and honest with me, sometimes painfully so, and I needed her perspective. "Elena," she said after I explained the situation, "I'm going to say something you might not want to hear. Your family's reaction to this inheritance is showing you who they really are. And it's not pretty." I winced. "Rachel, they're my family. They're good people who are just dealing with financial stress. Good people don't try to guilt-trip someone into giving up a $15 million inheritance 3 weeks after their beloved aunt died. Good people don't treat family members like ATMs. Good people respect the wishes of the deceased and the autonomy of the inheritor." Her words stung because they contained truth I didn't want to acknowledge. "So what are you saying? I should cut off my family?" "I'm saying you should recognize that their behavior right now has nothing to do with love and everything to do with money. If they can't separate those two things, then you have bigger problems than how to manage your inheritance. Rachel's perspective was harsh, but clarifying. She helped me see that the pressure I was experiencing wasn't normal family dynamics, it was manipulation, even if it wasn't consciously intended as such. After we hung up, I made a decision. I would return to Phoenix in 2 days for a family meeting. I would clearly explain my position, offer reasonable assistance within boundaries I was comfortable with, and then return to Denver to begin building my new life. I hoped my family would understand and accept my decision, but I was prepared for the possibility that they wouldn't. The family meeting took place on a Sunday afternoon at my parents' house. The setting was deliberately casual, no lawyers, no formal conference room, just family sitting around the kitchen table where we had shared thousands of meals over the years. I hoped the familiar environment would help keep the conversation civil and productive. I had prepared extensively for this meeting, writing out my main points and anticipating their likely responses. I felt nervous, but determined as I looked around the table at my parents and brothers. I know everyone has been thinking about Isabella's will and what it means for our family, I began. I've spent the past few weeks learning about the inheritance, talking to financial advisors, and trying to understand Isabella's wishes. I want to share my thoughts and hear yours, but I also want to be clear about my decisions. Dad immediately interrupted. Elena, before you say anything, we want you to know that we've been talking as a family about this situation. We think the fair thing to do is to divide the inheritance equally among all of us. Isabella may have put your name on the paperwork, but this money should benefit everyone. I took a deep breath. Dad, I understand that's what you would prefer, but that's not going to happen. Isabella specifically chose to leave the money to me, and I'm going to honor that decision. The room erupted in protests. Mom started crying. Miguel accused me of being brainwashed by my fancy financial advisors. David pulled out his spreadsheets again, insisting that equal division was the only fair approach. I waited for the initial outburst to subside, then continued. I'm not going to divide the inheritance equally, but I do want to help the family within reasonable limits. I'm prepared to pay off Mom and Dad's mortgage, which I believe is about $60,000. I'm also willing to pay for David to attend a financial counseling program to address his gambling issues, and I'll cover Miguel's remaining student loans. These were significant offers, probably close to $100,000 total, but the family's reaction was immediate and negative. That's insulting, Miguel said angrily. Elena, we're talking about $15 million, and you're offering to pay off some student loans? Mom wiped her eyes and looked at me with disappointment I had never seen before. Elena, I raised you to care about family. Your father and I sacrificed everything to give you opportunities, and this is how you repay us. David leaned across the table urgently. Elena, think about what we could accomplish together. We could start businesses, buy properties, create generational wealth for everyone. Instead, you want to hoard it all for yourself. Dad's reaction was perhaps the most painful. He looked at me with genuine bewilderment, as if I had become someone he didn't recognize. Elena, I don't understand who you've become. The daughter I raised would never turn her back on family like this. These words hit me hard because they echoed my own fears. Was I being selfish? Was I turning my back on family? But then I remembered Isabella's words about not letting others make me feel guilty about my choices, and I found my strength. I'm not turning my back on family, I said firmly. I'm offering significant help within boundaries that make sense to me. But I'm not going to be guilt-tripped into giving away money that Isabella specifically entrusted to me. The argument continued for over 2 hours. My family alternated between emotional appeals, logical arguments, and thinly veiled threats. They questioned my character, my values, and my love for them. They painted scenarios of family gatherings where I would be isolated and resented. They warned me that money couldn't replace family relationships. Throughout it all, I noticed something disturbing. Not once did anyone acknowledge Isabella's right to distribute her wealth as she chose. Not once did anyone respect my autonomy as the inheritor. Not once did anyone ask what I wanted to do with my life or how this inheritance might help me achieve my own dreams. As the meeting wound down, it became clear that we had reached an impasse. My family couldn't accept my decision to keep the bulk of the inheritance, and I wouldn't be bullied into giving it away to avoid conflict. I'm sorry you're all disappointed, I said as I gathered my things to leave. But this is my decision to make. The offers I've made today stand for the next 30 days. After that, I'll be focusing on building my own life with this inheritance. The silence as I left was deafening. I could feel their anger and disappointment following me out the door, but I also felt something else, relief. I had stood my ground. I had honored both Isabella's wishes and my own judgment. The conversation hadn't gone well, but it was finished. Over the next month, the family pressure intensified in ways I hadn't expected. My parents' daily phone calls became weekly guilt sessions where they detailed their financial struggles and reminded me of their sacrifices. When I offered again to pay off their mortgage, Mom responded, "Elena, we don't want your charity. We want our daughter back." Miguel and David took different approaches. Miguel sent long text messages explaining how the inheritance could fund his dream of opening a restaurant, complete with business plans and projected profits. David created social media posts about family loyalty and the corrupting influence of money, clearly intended for me to see. The extended family got involved too. Cousins, aunts, and uncles reached out to share their opinions about my selfishness and the damage I was doing to family relationships. Some of these conversations were painful, especially with older relatives whose approval had always mattered to me. The most difficult part was the gradual realization that my family's love had always been somewhat conditional. As long as I was the struggling younger sister who needed guidance and occasionally provided financial help, I was valued and included. But as soon as I had significant resources they wanted access to, the dynamic changed completely. During this difficult period, I found unexpected support from Sarah Martinez, my financial advisor. She had worked with many clients navigating family pressure around inherited wealth, and her perspective was invaluable. "Elena," she said during one of our regular meetings, "what you're experiencing is a form of financial abuse. Your family is using emotional manipulation to try to control your financial decisions. That's not love, it's exploitation." The term financial abuse shocked me at first, but as Sarah explained the concept, I recognized the patterns. The guilt trips, the threats of isolation, the attacks on my character and values all were tactics designed to wear down my resistance and force me to comply with their demands. Sarah helped me develop strategies for handling the ongoing pressure. We established clear boundaries around family financial discussions, practiced responses to common guilt trips, and created a support network of professionals who understood my situation. 6 weeks after the family meeting, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. I decided to step back from my family relationships temporarily. The constant pressure and emotional manipulation were taking a toll on my mental health and preventing me from moving forward with my life. I sent a letter to each family member explaining my decision. "I love you all, but I need space to process Isabella's death and plan my future without constant pressure about the inheritance. I'm not cutting you out of my life permanently, but I am taking a break from regular contact. My offers of financial assistance remain open for the next month. After that, I'll be focusing on building my own life and honoring Isabella's trust in me. I hope someday you'll understand and respect my decision." The responses to my letter revealed the true depth of my family's anger and disappointment. Dad called me selfish and ungrateful. Mom accused me of choosing money over family. Miguel and David sent angry messages questioning my values and predicting that I would regret my choices. But something interesting happened in the weeks that followed. I felt lighter than I had since Isabella's death. Without the constant pressure and guilt trips, I could finally grieve her loss properly and begin thinking about my future with excitement rather than anxiety. Working with my financial team, I developed a comprehensive plan for the inheritance. The real estate portfolio would be maintained and expanded, providing steady rental income. A portion of the liquid assets would be invested in diversified portfolios for long-term growth. Another portion would fund a charitable foundation focused on financial education for young people, something Isabella would have loved. I also began planning my own life changes. The inheritance gave me freedom to pursue dreams that had seemed impossible on a marketing coordinator's salary. I enrolled in an MBA program to better understand business and investment strategies. I planned travel to places Isabella had always wanted to visit. I even began considering starting my own business, something I had always dreamed about but never had the capital to attempt. 3 months after stepping back from family contact, I received an unexpected call from Miguel. His tone was different, less demanding, more reflective. "Elena," he said, "I've been thinking about everything that's happened since Isabella died. I need to apologize for how I acted. I was so focused on what the money could do for me that I forgot to consider what you were going through." His apology was surprising and welcome, though I remained cautious. "Thank you, Miguel. That means a lot to me. I've been talking to a therapist about family dynamics and financial stress," he continued. "She helped me understand that we were treating you unfairly. Isabella left the money to you for good reasons, and we should have respected that from the beginning." Over the following weeks, Miguel and I began rebuilding our relationship. He had gotten a steady job and was working on his own issues rather than looking for external solutions. He still struggled financially, but he had stopped seeing me as responsible for fixing his problems. David's journey was more difficult. His gambling issues had worsened during the family conflict, and he had accumulated new debts while fantasizing about inheritance money solving his problems. Eventually, he reached out to ask for help with treatment, and I agreed to fund a residential program that addressed both addiction and financial management. My parents' journey was the most complex. They struggled to accept that their financial problems were their own to solve, and they remained convinced that I was being selfish by keeping the inheritance. However, after several months of minimal contact, they began to miss having me in their lives more than they resented not having access to my money. Mom eventually called to ask if we could have coffee when I next visited Phoenix. "I don't understand your decisions, Elena," she said honestly, "but I miss my daughter. I want to find a way to rebuild our relationship that doesn't revolve around money." It was a start. We began having regular phone conversations that focused on our lives and interests rather than financial issues. Slowly, we rebuilt trust and connection. Dad took longer to come around, but eventually he too reached out to repair our relationship. A year after Isabella's death, I hosted a small memorial service on the anniversary of her passing. My parents and brothers attended, along with some of Isabella's friends and tenants whose lives she had touched. We shared stories about her generosity, wisdom, and the lessons she had taught us about money and relationships. During the service, I announced the establishment of the Isabella Martinez Foundation for Financial Literacy, funded by a significant portion of her inheritance. The foundation would provide free financial education to young adults, teach responsible money management, and offer small business loans to entrepreneurs from underserved communities. Isabella always said that money is a tool, not a trophy, I told the gathering. This foundation will help others learn to use that tool wisely, just as she taught me. After the service, my family and I had dinner together, our first family meal in over a year. The conversation was different now. Instead of focusing on what I could do for them financially, they asked about my plans, my education, and my happiness. They shared their own progress in addressing their financial issues and personal growth. Miguel told us about his promotion at work and his plan to save for a small restaurant in a few years. David discussed his progress in recovery and his new job in construction. My parents talked about their efforts to budget more carefully and plan for retirement. The inheritance had indeed changed our family, but not in the ways any of us had expected. Rather than bringing us together through shared wealth, it had forced us apart until we could find healthier ways to relate to each other. 2 years after Isabella's death, I can honestly say that inheriting $15 million was both the best and worst thing that had ever happened to me. The financial security and opportunities were incredible, but the family conflict was devastating. However, the crisis had ultimately led to stronger, more honest relationships with the people who mattered most. I had used the inheritance to complete my MBA, start a successful consulting business focused on helping family enterprises navigate succession and conflict, and travel extensively to understand different cultures' approaches to wealth and family relationships. The real estate portfolio continued to grow, providing both income and housing for families at reasonable rents. Most importantly, I had learned to trust my own judgment and resist manipulation, even from people I loved. Isabella's final gift to me wasn't just financial wealth, it was the opportunity to discover my own strength and values under pressure. The foundation had already helped over 500 young adults learn financial management skills and provided startup loans to 50 small businesses. Each success story reminded me of Isabella's belief that money should be a tool for positive change. During one of my quarterly foundation board meetings, I received a call from James Chin, Isabella's attorney. He had been handling some remaining estate matters and had discovered something unexpected among Isabella's papers. "Elena," he said, "I found a sealed letter addressed to you among your aunt's personal documents. She left specific instructions that it should only be given to you 2 years after her death if you had successfully managed the inheritance responsibly." The letter, written in Isabella's familiar handwriting, brought tears to my eyes. "My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, it means you have navigated the challenges of inheriting wealth while maintaining your integrity and independence. I am proud of you, though not surprised. I knew that leaving you my estate would create family conflict. I watched for years as your parents and brothers struggled with money management and became increasingly dependent on external solutions to their problems. I saw how they treated you as a resource rather than recognizing your individual worth and potential. The inheritance was never really about the money, Elena. It was about giving you the freedom to discover who you are when you're not trying to please everyone else. Money amplifies character. It makes generous people more generous and selfish people more selfish. It reveals true priorities and authentic relationships. I chose you because you understand that wealth is a responsibility, not just an opportunity. You have the wisdom to use money as a tool for positive change rather than allowing it to become your master. Most importantly, you have the strength to make difficult decisions when pressure comes from people you love. The hardest lesson I learned in my life was that sometimes loving your family means disappointing them. Sometimes protecting yourself means setting boundaries that others will resent. Sometimes honoring someone's memory means making choices they wouldn't understand. You have passed the test I never intended to create but knew would be inevitable. You have shown that you can be generous without being exploited, loving without being manipulated, and strong without being cruel. Use this inheritance to build a life that honors both your dreams and your values. Help others when you choose to, not when you're pressured to. Trust your judgment, even when everyone else questions it. And remember that the greatest gift I could give you wasn't the money, it was the confidence to know that you deserve good things in life, not because of what you can provide others, but because of who you are. With all my love and faith in your future, Aunt Isabella. P.S. There's one more surprise. Check with James about the safety deposit box I never mentioned. Consider it a graduation gift for successfully completing the most difficult course anyone can take, learning to be yourself despite family pressure. The safety deposit box contained an additional $2 million in rare coins and precious metals that Isabella had collected over the years, along with a note explaining that this was fun money, meant for travel, education, or whatever brought me joy without any strings attached. Standing in the bank vault, holding Isabella's final gift, I realized how completely she had understood the journey I would need to take. She had anticipated the family pressure, the guilt, the isolation, and the eventual growth that would come from standing firm in my convictions. 3 years after the inheritance, I had learned to navigate the complex dynamics of family relationships and money. My parents and I had rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than financial dependence. Miguel had opened his small restaurant with money he had saved himself, and while I had offered to help with the initial investment, he had declined, wanting to succeed through his own efforts. David had completed his treatment program and maintained steady employment, occasionally asking for advice, but never for money. The most unexpected development had been meeting Thomas Chin, James's son, who worked as a non-profit consultant helping wealthy individuals develop strategic giving plans. Our professional relationship had evolved into a personal one, and he understood the unique challenges that came with inherited wealth because he had observed them through his father's work with many clients. Thomas had no interest in my money. His own family was financially comfortable, and he was passionate about his work rather than material acquisition. Our relationship was built on shared values, intellectual compatibility, and genuine affection rather than financial considerations. For the first time in years, I was with someone who saw me as Elena, not as an inheritance. As I prepared to celebrate what would have been Isabella's 65th birthday, I reflected on how much had changed since that shocking day in James Chen's office. The inheritance had indeed transformed my life, but not in ways I could have predicted. I had learned that family love and financial exploitation could coexist uncomfortably. I had discovered that standing up for yourself sometimes requires disappointing people you care about. I had found that money could provide freedom, but only if you had the courage to use it wisely despite pressure from others. Most importantly, I had learned to trust Isabella's judgment about my character. She had seen qualities in me that I hadn't fully recognized: the ability to make difficult decisions, the strength to withstand emotional manipulation, and the wisdom to use wealth responsibly rather than reactively. The foundation continued to grow, now operating in 3 states and helping hundreds of young adults each year develop financial literacy and entrepreneurial skills. We had expanded to include programs for family financial communication, helping families navigate money discussions in healthier ways than my own family had initially managed. During our annual foundation gala, I often shared Isabella's quote about money being a tool, not a trophy. The phrase had become our organizational motto, and I watched audience members nod in recognition of a truth that seemed simple but was remarkably difficult to live by. Standing on the stage at this year's gala, looking out at an audience that included successful foundation alumni, generous donors, and my family, who now attended as proud supporters rather than potential beneficiaries, I felt the profound satisfaction of having honored both Isabella's memory and my own values. 3 years ago, I told the audience, I inherited more than money. I inherited a choice. I could let wealth define me, or I could use it to define the life I wanted to build. I could give in to pressure from others about how to spend it, or I could trust my own judgment about how to invest it meaningfully. I paused, catching my mother's eye in the audience. She smiled and nodded encouragingly, a gesture that would have seemed impossible during those difficult months after Isabella's death. The hardest part wasn't managing the money, I continued. It was learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to maintain boundaries they don't understand. Sometimes honoring someone's memory requires disappointing people in the present. Sometimes building genuine relationships means refusing to be defined by what you can provide others. After the gala, my family joined me for a quiet dinner at Isabella's favorite restaurant, which I had helped save from bankruptcy during the pandemic. The owner, Maria Santos, had been one of Isabella's tenants and had always spoken fondly of her fair treatment and personal investment in her success. As we sat around the table sharing stories about Isabella and discussing our current lives, I marveled at how much healthier our family dynamics had become. Miguel talked excitedly about his restaurant's expansion plans, which he was funding through a combination of business loans and reinvested profits. David discussed his promotion to construction site supervisor and his engagement to a woman who supported his recovery journey. My parents shared their pride in their children's individual achievements and their own progress toward a more secure retirement through careful budgeting and delayed gratification. Elena, Dad said as we finished dessert, I owe you an apology I should have offered years ago. When Isabella died and left you her estate, I was so focused on what that money could do for our family's problems that I forgot to consider what you were going through as the person who had lost someone you loved. He paused, looking directly at me with an expression I had rarely seen from him, genuine remorse mixed with respect. You were grieving, overwhelmed by sudden responsibility, and trying to honor Isabella's wishes, and instead of supporting you, we added pressure and guilt. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. Mom reached across the table to squeeze my hand. We're proud of who you've become, Elena. Not because of the money you inherited, but because of the person you've shown yourself to be under pressure. Isabella would be proud too. These words meant more to me than any amount of money ever could. They represented the family relationships I had always wanted, based on mutual respect, individual growth, and unconditional love rather than financial transactions and unmet expectations. As we left the restaurant that evening, I felt a profound sense of completion. Isabella's inheritance had given me financial security, but more importantly, it had given me the opportunity to discover my own strength, establish healthy boundaries, and build authentic relationships. The money had been life-changing, but the real transformation had been learning to trust myself, even when everyone else questioned my judgment. I had honored Isabella's memory not just by managing her wealth responsibly, but by refusing to let others manipulate me into betraying my own values. Walking through downtown Phoenix with my family, pointing out buildings in Isabella's real estate portfolio that now provided affordable housing to hundreds of families, I realized that the inheritance had become exactly what Isabella had intended, a tool for positive change both in my own life and in the broader community. 6 months later, I received a letter that brought the story full circle. It was from Maria Santos's daughter, Carmen, a recent college graduate who had received a foundation scholarship to pursue her MBA. She wrote, "Ms. Rodriguez, I wanted to thank you for the scholarship that made my education possible. My mother told me about your Aunt Isabella and how she helped our family when we needed it most. Now you're continuing that legacy by helping people like me who want to build better futures for our families. I've learned about your foundation's history and the difficult family situation you navigated after your aunt's death. Your story has taught me that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is trust our own judgment, even when others disagree. Thank you for showing that inherited wealth can be a force for good when managed by someone with wisdom and integrity. I hope to start my own business someday and create jobs in our community, just like your aunt did. I want to use my education to lift up others, the way you've lifted up me." Reading Carmen's letter, I understood that Isabella's legacy was continuing to multiply through each person we helped, each business we funded, each family that learned better financial communication. The inheritance had become a river of positive change flowing through our community, touching lives in ways we might never fully know. That evening, I called Thomas to share Carmen's letter. We had been engaged for 6 months, planning a small wedding that would honor both our values and Isabella's memory. Thomas had proposed at Isabella's gravesite, asking for her blessing before asking for mine, a gesture that showed he understood the importance of her influence on my life. "Elena," he said after I finished reading the letter aloud, "do you ever regret the family conflict that came with the inheritance?" I considered the question carefully. I regret the pain it caused everyone, including myself. But I don't regret standing firm in my decisions. That conflict forced all of us to grow in ways we might never have otherwise. It taught me to trust myself and taught my family to relate to me as an individual rather than as a resource. And now I feel like we're all more authentic with each other. Miguel doesn't resent me for having opportunities he lacks. He's proud of creating his own success. David doesn't see me as responsible for solving his problems. He's learned to solve them himself. My parents don't treat me as their retirement plan. They're building their own financial security. I paused, looking at Isabella's photograph on my desk, surrounded by pictures of foundation scholarship recipients, successful small business owners, and families whose lives had been improved through the programs we funded. Isabella once told me that the greatest gift she could give me wasn't the money, but the confidence to know I deserve good things because of who I am, not what I can provide others. The inheritance was her way of forcing me to learn that lesson. As I prepared for bed that night in the comfortable but not ostentatious home I had purchased with inheritance funds, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. For years ago, I had been a struggling marketing coordinator with student loans and a complicated relationship with family expectations. Today, I was a successful business owner, foundation director, and soon-to-be wife, with healthy relationships built on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. The inheritance had indeed changed everything, but not in the way my family had originally envisioned. Instead of making everyone wealthy, it had made everyone stronger. Instead of solving external problems, it had forced internal growth. Instead of bringing us together through shared money, it had brought us together through shared respect. If you're watching this from a situation where family members are pressuring you about money, inheritance, or financial decisions, I hope my story offers some guidance. Money has a way of revealing people's true priorities and character, including your own. Trust your judgment, even when others question it. Set boundaries that protect your values, even when they're unpopular. Remember that the people who truly love you will eventually respect your autonomy, even if they initially disagree with your choices. And if you're dealing with inherited wealth specifically, know that the pressure and guilt you're experiencing are unfortunately normal. The person who left you that inheritance chose you for reasons that deserve respect. Honor their judgment by using the wealth in ways that align with your values and goals, not with others' expectations or demands. Isabella's final lesson continues to guide me daily. Money is indeed a tool, not a trophy. Use it wisely, share it generously when you choose to, and never let others manipulate you into financial decisions that betray your own judgment and values. The most valuable inheritance isn't money, it's the wisdom to use whatever resources you have to build a life that reflects your authentic self and contributes positively to the world around you. Isabella gave me both the financial means and the emotional strength to create such a life. That gift continues to pay dividends in ways that can't be measured in dollars. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please like and subscribe and share your own experiences with family financial pressure in the comments below. Remember that you deserve relationships based on love and respect, not on what you can provide others financially. And most importantly, trust yourself. You likely have more wisdom than you realize about what's right for your own life. As Isabella would say, use your resources as tools for building the life you want to live, not the life others expect you to fund. The greatest wealth is the freedom to be authentically yourself, regardless of others' opinions or expectations.